Hello, welcome to Launch Left. This is our inaugural artist takeover show. It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine because Michael Stipe is hosting this show, and he's brought his friend Jem Cohen, filmmaker, incredible human being. They both are. You're going to love this show. Please welcome them to the show. But first, don't forget to rate and subscribe. Follow us on all socials at Launch Left.
This is Launch Left with Artist Takeover. I'm your host, Michael Stipe, tonight speaking to Jem Cohen, filmmaker and artist extraordinaire. Hi, Jem. How are you?
Hi, Michael. I'm all right.
Happy New Year, all things considered. And given the times, given what we're moving through, I know both of us feel a bit of reticence about having a conversation about art and music and the creative arts at a time like now. And yet it does beg a question of people like ourselves, creators, let's say. Are you okay with that term?
People use it with ill will. I'm allergic to it.
We're people who make things.
That I like. Some
of them are tangible. Some of them are made of light. Some of them are made of sound. Some of them you can touch. A lot of them you can't. But yeah. We're artists and filmmakers and musicians and all around good guys. And yet the times that we're living in and the times we're living through, the moment that we are in right this second as we record this, the moment that we are anticipating, we have no idea what's going to happen. Things have been very, very, very strange. We're out of 2020, thank God. We're in 2021. I feel optimistic, and as much as one can, I feel like what we've been through might put us in a better place with a lot of difficulty. But the question that I think Launch Left is really interested in is, how does filmmaking, music, the creative arts, art, what role do we have in politics, in activism? How do these two somewhat disparate things or seemingly disparate things merge and come together? What's your take on that?
Well, my take on it is that the merger is necessary, and it's also inherent. And I don't claim for myself the title of activist because a lot of people do it a lot more full time and a lot better than I do. But I also feel that it's been part of my life since I was a little kid at some of the biggest peace marches that the nation has ever seen. I was in those making signs, and I'm still at the protests, not necessarily with a sign, but I'm there. And I've been involved in a lot of strange pockets of activism that I never expected to be involved with, whether it was fighting the nuclear and toxic waste storage depot in the poor neighborhood of Williamsburg where I lived. I fought that with my brother for 7 or 8 years. I completely forget about it. It's like some bizarre artifact from my past. And then I think one of the most important struggles I was involved in was very intimately entwined with filmmaking and photography, which was fighting for the rights of photographers to shoot on the street in 2007. And that was a strange moment where almost under the radar, they were going to change the regulations that would have said that in order to photograph on the street, you needed $1 million coverage in a permit, and you had a limitation of 15 minutes in one place, and all of these other stringent regulations that were just sort of quietly going to slide into place. And it's a long story as to why those rules came up for review, but basically a few of us found out about it, and within a few months we had 30,000 signatures, and people like D.A. Pennebaker and Magnum Photo Agency and so on, making a big ruckus. And then it was a couple of years of going to hearings, and we had our support from the New York Civil Liberties Union, which is a part of connected to the ACLU. And, and we turned it around. I mean, I still can't believe that at that point, we managed to actually win that one to the degree that it became a very a very good place to shoot on the street, because there was a recognition of prioritizing the rights of the artist to do their work as a mode of freedom of expression, as long as they weren't, actively interfering with other people. And so, that was a really beautiful moment, and in which, the tradition that I had been brought up in my family of street photography, because my mom was married to a very important teacher and street photographer. And so that was part of my family history, was not only street photography, but also this, her former husband, his name was Sid Grossman. He was blacklisted in the McCarthy era, and he couldn't work. And he died after a couple of years from a heart attack. And my mother always felt that the FBI and Joe McCarthy killed him, which suddenly brings me to a memory. Part of that legacy was one of Sid's students was a great street photographer, Leon Levenstein. And early in the days when I met you, I remember taking you to the little storage room where this mountain of incredible photographs were stored. And, Leon was largely forgotten. And I knew that you loved photography. And that was one of the things that, that I thought would be a special thing for us to do. So it's a nice little memory.
It certainly is. And I was going to bring up Leon. I look around, I look behind you, and I look behind me. We're both in our studios here, and I see similar stacks of things to Leon's storage facility. It happens. But along with Leon, we had, incredible Lee Friedlander is still with us. Robert Frank recently left us in this form, but also left us with a lifetime of unbelievable material and images and beautiful memories, personal memories, but also just the work that he did. Gary Winogrand, I don't know if you saw the show that was on of his at the Metropolitan.
I did. I love Winogrand, and that show was amazing. Heartbreaking too, but really also like joyful.
I remember that they had demarcated, I think by color or by frame, images that he had printed in his lifetime.
Right.
Images that he had marked on contact sheets but had never been printed in his lifetime. And then images that were chosen by the curators that they thought after he was gone and had no say in it, they thought that these images told a story of who he was and what type of artist he was. And I thought significant to include all three, but really incredible that they allowed us, the audience, to be intelligent enough to be able to mark each of them so that we could distinguish one from the other. We weren't looking strictly at his body of work that he was able to print in his lifetime, but the stuff that he also chose, and then the stuff that they chose represented him.
There's a degree to which it freaks people out that Winogrand left hundreds of thousands of pictures, thousands and thousands of rolls of film, not even processed, much less printed. There's something maybe troubling and dark about that I understand when I dig through my own archive and I realize that I've got hundreds of thousands of rolls of film and tapes that are never going to be reckoned with, probably. But there's also something that I think about it, which is that Winogrand and Robert Frank and Helen Levitt and Leon Levenstein, Arbus too, they love their work.
Wendy Ewald, she's not quite a street photographer.
Yeah, but she's a wonderful entity, and her work, especially with kids, and has meant a lot to me. But all of those people love their work. They love shooting. They love being in the world, and the, whether or not they got to print all of it or be at their shows or be at their retrospectives or get their due is pretty secondary to the fact that it was a very joyful thing. I think it's a big misconception that people have about a lot of artists, but street photography in particular, which is that even if people are doing work that can be very critical of aspects of the world that they have trouble with or that they wish would change, there's something in the doing. There's something in the being there and the wandering that's totally a blast. It's totally it's exciting, and it's obsessive. It's often very funny. It's just a great way to spend time on this planet. And I try to remind myself of that a lot, that even when I get bogged down and worrying about, the debacle that is my archive, or, preservation and all those aspects, I remember that I actually had a pretty good time collecting all those, dust balls and stashing them away. And then every once in a while I go dig through them and I find things that are important to me. Right now, you mentioned Robert Frank, and a lot of people don't know the amazing artist, his wife, June Leaf, who's 91 now. And she's been one of my favorite artists for, 25 years. And I'm trying to do a portrait of her now. And I'm digging through my archive and I'm finding, here's a little fragment of Super 8. And here's a little, little bit of an interview that I got out of her in, 2011 or whatever. So that's a big part of my life, is to try to do some of that sifting, while it's still possible.
I would throw Ouija in with that list of people, although he was working on a whole other level. But
yeah, I mean, there's so many. I really, really love Roy de Carava, who's one of, and it was just incredible this year to see 2 big shows of original prints, because that's the kind of thing that, and de Carava is instructive. One thing that's important to note about de Carava is you have to be there with the prints, because some of them are so dark that it's like you can barely find John Coltrane, and then you find him, and it's so beautiful. But it can't reproduce all that perfectly, and you really can't see it on a little screen. You can't see it on your phone. You can't see it. That's not every kind of photo that he took wasn't that way, but an awful lot of them were, and they're sublime. So
I've been watching the Fran Lebowitz series show with Martin Scorsese. I really recommend it. But she's, in a way, as a writer, she's documenting her world in the same way as all the photographers, all the street photographers we've been talking about. And you as a filmmaker, what's your take on, like, the way things are stored now, the way these things that we leave behind? Let's say you and I are here for another 50 years, and then we spin off and we go on to the next iteration, because you're as much of a control freak as I am with the work that you do and with how it's presented, how it's put together, all the stuff. What's your take on that archive of stuff and people digging through it and pulling from it after you're gone, after I'm gone?
I'm conflicted. I'm pretty obsessed with it. I think we're at an age where that it's no surprise that we start to think about that kind of thing. But I don't know how to sort it. I mean, in part because there's a lot of things I can't control. I mean, a lot of preservation has to do with having the means and the money to properly preserve things. And I'm realizing, like, that's just not exactly in the cards. There are some things that I'm very thankful to have gotten into collections, like, the Museum of Modern Art has to take care of some of my junk, whether they want to or not. That's the kind of the deal that I was lucky to make with some films. But there's a lot of other, the raw footage, a lot of still photographs. A lot of things are just on ephemeral formats. A lot of the video, I can't move them from 1-inch open reel to Beta SP to Digibeta or D1 to proper, it's crazy. And there's a lot of planned obsolescence where things just go. A lot of my photo work has been done in Polaroid, and those were never meant to last 150 years or 100 years. Some of them, so I'm torn about it.
Let's move forward 150 years. Let's make it an absurd amount of time. Humanity still exists. The 20th century and the early part of the 21st century are fascinating. Let's say the first half of the 21st century are fascinating to people. Then, like, what did it look like? What were people what, like, why did they make the choices and the decisions that they made? Let's say the Jem Cohen archive is a huge part of how people are able to imagine or picture what it was like to live now. Would that thrill you, or would that disturb you thinking about it now?
Well, I don't think it's bloody likely, Michael.
No,
but I mean, it's yeah. Okay, just imagine. Here's what I'll say.
Like beta to, reel to reel to 8-track to vinyl to cassette to DVD to whatever. Let's get beyond all that. Let's just say that by some magical thing,
right,
your archive is discovered, and it's the only one. It's the one that really shows New York City from 1985 to 2045.
Then I would be mad that I missed all the things that I missed, because there's an awful lot of like little mom and pop shops that went under that I always meant to go shoot and didn't, or a lot of people that I meant to talk to more that I didn't, and so on. But the truth of the matter is, I mean, if you're going to ask, it's kind of an embarrassing thing to say, but I'm here to make the work, and I want the work to travel on. I don't think it's going to travel on forever and ever and ever, but I would love to get a few hundred years out of it. One of my favorite things is to stand in front of a painting from the 1600s or the 1500s and have my mind be totally blown that the colors are that unearthly present. When I'm looking at a Bosch or a Bruegel or I just can't believe that that it's stuck around, and that humans get to stand in front of it and have their minds blown yet again. So I have hopes that I think that this is, I love museums. I did a feature film just mostly to say, I love what a museum can do. I like that. I like art. My fame in this life is dubious and secondary, but I can't pretend that I'm not trying to make work that sticks around a little bit. So I try to do that. I try to attend to that. I put my effort into just making more and more and more of it, in the hopes that somehow, by some luck, it gets found. But I'm not able to put all of the energy into preserving it and promoting it and pushing it now. My energy has to go towards the next thing that I want to make, because we all have this crazy ability to forget what a pain in the ass it is to actually, like, you're trying to finish a book right now, and I would guess that to some degree it's harrowing, and you wish you could sleep a little later instead of digging through the box for that picture or whatever it is that you have to do.
I pulled an image yesterday. I'm on so far behind deadline. I pulled an image yesterday, and I'm replacing it after our conversation today.
Yeah. So, well, that's the thing that sometimes has to happen. But for Winogrand, he reached a point where that was no longer in the picture. That was no longer in the cards. And so that's the way it rolled. This
speaks to something that I find, it's for me one of the more fascinating aspects of our history together, that we both arrived at something at the same time in the early 90s. I'm going to place it. It's about it's about our work, our visual work, being timeless, and then how at the same time, in my memory, and correct me if I'm wrong, you and I arrived at that timelessness being a ludicrous position for each of us as visual artists to take up. And we started, rather than framing out the aspects of life that link to a certain time, we started framing in those aspects. You want to talk about that?
Look, we used to butt heads a lot when we would talk about art. I mean, that's one of my funniest, earliest memories of late 80s, first time being at your place in Athens and having a kind of a knockdown, drag out argument about like appropriation. It's like still stuff that we disagree about, but there's a lot more that we do agree about. And I think that, like, when you mention that, I think very specifically to a piece that you might have seen because it was at the High Museum in Atlanta, which was a portrait of Central and Eastern Europe soon after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And what happened to me is that there were so many places on earth that I loved, with buildings I loved and streets I loved and so on. But I found increasingly over the years that I was having to put something that I really did not love out of the frame in order to get the shot of the beautiful old house or street or whatever. And it struck me in Eastern Europe when I was at some unbelievably beautiful train station and shooting Super 8 and like waiting for the light, and a train rolled in that was like 10 cars, just completely, the whole entire train was the Coca-Cola logo, as if the train itself was just one long rolling advertisement. And it broke my heart, but then that became part of what I was documenting. And then I went on to take that in a much more absurd direction with the Project Chain, where I began to collect images of shopping malls and chain hotels and superhighways, and to sort of play this weird game of, one of the things that I was doing was to see if I could join them all together seamlessly so that you wouldn't know where you were anymore. And I used to talk to you a lot about that in regards to Greater Athens area and what was happening in Atlanta and the way the suburbs just spread and spread and spread. But another thing that I was doing also was finding that sometimes it was beautiful being in the hateful parking lot and, looking at the weird glow from the shopping mall. Like I didn't want to pretend that was not part of the world, that there was also sometimes a weird beauty in terrible things, and that's it's just always been a part of it. I mean, I thought about it a lot when I was working with Fugazi and going back and forth across the country and instrument and shooting, fast food places and all, and thinking about the fact that we were moving through that landscape, that as musicians, they were moving through a landscape that they would then reflect in their work, and I could hear wonderful pieces of it in their lyrics and that kind of thing. So I think I do believe in timelessness. I think maybe the best thing that I did over the COVID lockdown bummer was I actually did finally read Moby Dick, and that's pretty damn timeless.
I'm reading Moby Dick. I can't believe you said that.
I have to say, the book is so weird, and it's so strangely funny in ways that I was not prepared for. And it's kind of it's hallucinatory, and it's a completely like advanced mix of fiction and nonfiction, documentary and hallucination. Like it's so crazy ahead of its time that I just couldn't believe it, because I thought that it was this sort of, it scared me for many years. It's just this difficult tome that I was probably never going to get to. And then finally, because of this mess, I got to it, and I can't get over how modern and tripped out it is. And it made me really happy.
One of the last things I did before COVID, before the lockdown, was to attend a dinner. I don't remember why I brought it up. I think because it is such a tome. Moby Dick is like this impossibly enormous book. I've been told now, Jem, and if you're still reading it, I don't know if you finished it.
No, I'm done. Yeah.
Okay. I'm still reading it. But at this dinner, I raised the question. So, I mean, who here really has read Moby Dick? Kind of like tossing it off. Every hand around the table. It was a party of about 9 people. I was the only person whose hand didn't go up. And I looked around and I was like, oh man, I need to read the book. It's time to read Moby Dick.
Well, we can't read everything. And there's a lot of things that I whip myself, I self-flagellate that I'm never going to get to this and never going to get to that. And, wish that I had read. There's a lot of things at the dinner party that my hand is not going to go up. That's the way it is. There's a lot of movies that I haven't seen that people can't believe I haven't seen. So,
is there one that you can name that's really like horrifyingly embarrassing that you've never seen? I could blow your mind with mine.
Oh, No, I mean, I could go on for at length, but I don't want to do that because I don't know, it would be a listicle or whatever they call those things. No, I mean, I don't really keep up. I don't keep up. I mean, you could name any famous actor and probably I've never seen them in a film, believe it or not. It's true. I mean, current, contemporary. And I'm not proud of that, actually. There are a lot of things that I just wish I had time for. But again, I'm not in my studio. I'm in my studio, but I'm in my apartment. And when I roll out of bed, I've got stacks of things that need to be logged and that I want to edit and all of that. And so I do very little actual movie watching at home. And occasionally, it's great to be able to take a moment with the Criterion Channel and catch up with something and like watch a Chantal Akerman movie that I wasn't able to catch ever before. Or the thing that I'm trying to remind myself to do right now is I think that they still have a bunch of Mae West movies. And Mae West is like Moby Dick, like shockingly.
I can't believe you said that.
Oh my God. This is too good.
It's yours. Happy birthday, baby.
We did not prepare this.
Are you ready for what it is though? It's a coat hanger.
Oh my God, that is so funny.
The two-sided Mae West coat hanger, I think from the 70s. This is a part of a project that I did that it's ongoing, but I became obsessed with certain figures from the past who were larger than life. And what I landed on, I did the whole thing with Roy Cohen on the darker side, James Dean, of course, Marilyn Monroe, of course, Marlon Brando, of course, Mae West. What I landed on really truly was Brando, and so Brando will be with me through, I think, the rest of my life. But anyway, I have an archive of Mae West. Where are we? There we go. And so, happy birthday, baby! This is for you.
Yeah, I mean, we have to be thankful for things like Mae West. But when you bring up this whole issue of archives and who, and what's everlasting and what isn't, everything always for me turns to Vic Chestnut, who is a deep, deep part of our background. And I'll detour for a minute to say, it's not the very first time I met you, because the very first time I met you, you won't remember, which is that your band REM was opening for the Ventures. I had the first single, and because of on the strength of that single, some friends.
New Haven at a place called Foggy or Cody's.
I don't remember where it was, but it probably was Toads in New Haven.
Toads.
So you were opening for the Ventures. I liked the Ventures, but I wasn't there to see them. We saw REM and I came and talked to you at the van. That's the first time that we met. The second time that we met, though,
You know who was there that night?
No.
Mae West. No, you know who was there that night, actually? And we had probably one of the worst pizzas I've ever eaten, but I ate 4 pieces because I was literally starving to death. Jane Pratt was there that night.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Jane Pratt was there that night. We opened for the Ventures exactly once. The guys might refute that, but I distinctly remember Toad's Place in New Haven.
Yeah, that would be right. And anyway,
I don't remember you.
But no, I mumbled a few words, and you, believe me, you mumbled them back, maybe even more quietly. It was a great, great show in which you did not budge from the microphone. You held the mic in both hands and you stared at a spot on the ceiling and did not engage with the audience one bit. And I thought it was one of the coolest things I'd ever seen, which it was. I mean, it was a beautiful, strange performance. But anyway, then I came down to Athens, Georgia in my old Chevy. And I was, you had given me kind of cryptic instructions of how to find you. But I pulled into a little place called the Java coffee shop / bicycle repair, if I recall correctly. And I sat down, and at the next table was a young guy in a wheelchair talking to a Mr. Seawright, and having some wild conversation about American history, probably. And they were very welcoming, and they were very kind to me as a kind of, mystery Yankee who had just pulled in. And that's how I met Vic. And then I found out that you had dragged him, that he was a musician, and that you had dragged him into the studio for the little recordings. And then eventually I ended up at one of the greatest art moments of my life, which is when you were producing West of Rome. And I was, because of a good project that Pete Sillin, a great friend and wonderful filmmaker, he was working on his little portrait of Vic and had hired me, and hired is stretching the word, but brought me along. And I ended up sitting in on that whole session of West of Rome. And it was one of the most, it will never get any better than that. And anyway, I brought all this up in my most circuitous fashion. Actually, I can be much more circuitous even than that. But I don't know how famous Vic is going to be. Vic is beloved by many people, and many people of many musicians of high regard love Vic Chestnut. He was never long in great obscurity, but he hasn't gotten anywhere near his due in the scheme of music and history. I mean, to me, as a writer, he is an American master on par with all of the American masters. And I have thought long and hard about Vic because I assumed that it would go another way, probably right around the time of his death. I thought he would be everywhere. And the truth was that on his last tour with some of the greatest musicians that I know, members of Fugazi and Godspeed You Black Emperor and other extraordinary musicians, they played in Boston to, 50, 75 people. That's outrageous to me. But, how many, but it's also the ridiculously overtold story about the tiny number of people in the room who saw the Velvet Underground, and then how it changed their lives. And so I don't know that it matters that much that Vic was never giant by today's standards or on social media, or, I don't know. I know that Vic, I know that I think of him every day, and I mean every day. And I know that I just love his work so much. And I'm so glad that he made a lot of it. He made so much of it. But I don't know what it means to think of, like, why the hell was the crowd that small in Boston for what I guarantee was one of the most powerful musical experiences that people could have experienced that night and somehow didn't, So I can't really quite get my head around that. And I grapple with it all the time in terms of a lot of artists that I love who are obscure, and when I met Benjamin and then eventually, long before I did Benjamin Smoke, that was an obscure band. Like, you were Georgia, so Benjamin was infamous to you, but outside of Georgia, people never really knew about Smoke. We have to remind ourselves of that when we fall into our obsessions about promotion or likes or how many followers we have or how many followers so and so has. It is sometimes these are actually kind of interesting tools that can bring things around the world in interesting ways where people can discover them. So I don't want to do it like a knee-jerk rejection of all of that stuff. But I do think we have to. Moby Dick was a bust. Moby Dick came out and failed.
Well, same with Van Gogh. I mean, a lot of
things. Yeah, and so
one of my great regrets is that I don't know that I gave as much as I admired and loved Vic, as much as and you made reference to this, but I'll just back it up by saying I met Vic before he'd ever recorded anything, and my first conversation with him, I said, "Let's get you in a studio before you kill yourself," and so I wound up producing his first album, Little, and then West of Rome, which you just spoke of. Hal Wilner, who we lost to COVID this year, one of my most admired producers and music lovers, the guy who is literally encyclopedic about every musical form ever recorded. Hal once paid me the greatest compliment I've ever been paid when he said that West of Rome was the best produced album he'd ever heard. I couldn't believe. I still hold that as the greatest compliment I've ever received.
Right on, and right on to Hal Wilner. I mean, what a beautiful man that was. I mean, beautiful. And he went down taking with him an arc of arcane musical knowledge, especially about jazz, that I don't think can be equaled, which is heartbreaking. But it's also pretty joyous to remember, how lucky it was to be able to sit at some diner and hear him tell stories. And so, that's what we have to remember more than what disappeared. But Hal was I'll never meet anybody like Hal Wilner. And I met Hal Wilner because I did a music video for you early on, the first one that I did, and I went to deliver it in Woodstock, New York, and ended up at this crazy party. And I was so freaked out that I was just scared and didn't know.
That was at Todd Rundgren's house.
Yes, we don't go into that whole party, but suffice to say, I ended up in the kitchen talking to Hal Wilner about Mary Margaret O'Hara, who again was at the time, not very well known, and Wilner revered her, as do you, as did Vic, as do I. To this day, we know that she is one of the greats. So,
all these people that we're talking about, yourself, Mary Margaret, Vic, Hal, are all portrayed in my next book of portraits.
Great.
Yeah. So and I'm not bringing this around to me. I made a pointed effort today not to talk about myself, which is very difficult, but for me. But I think the resonance of the work of these people carries on. However,
well, it does, and we also have to remind ourselves to keep discovering new people. I mean, I when I wrote the memorial spiel for Vic at his service, I talked about how Vic turned me on to C.D. Wright, this incredible poet who we also, lost a few years ago. But C.D. Wright, I might not have heard of her if it hadn't been for Vic. And then, she's one of the epic forces. I mean, she's quite well known in the world of poetry, certainly, but she should have been known to me. And right now I'm looking at these incredible photo books by this guy, Stephen Gill. They're such a joy. They're so amazing to me, and they're so beautifully made. One thing that he kind of got out there a little farther than other things was he did a book where he put a camera on a post in a field out in nowhere, and then it was right a few feet away from another post, and it was triggered whenever a bird landed on one. So it was like bird self-portraits, and they're so astonishingly strange and beautiful. He's like a one-man factory of incredible bookmaking. I encourage people to go to his site called Nobody Books. They're very, very beautiful. They're very wonderful, and it's just making me so happy to be able to sit with his stuff. And I'm listening to a sax player, Montana Roberts, who is just, I'm just so happy to be like sitting and listening to her and knowing that I don't have any idea what kind of music this could be identified as, because it might be jazz and it might be improv and it might be something that there isn't the name for it, but it's like, it's great, and I'm listening to my friends, Jim White and George Yorgos Zilora. So I think that you've seen this incredible duo, but Jim recently did a record with a guitarist I didn't know named Marissa Anderson, and it's just a wildly beautiful record, that I'm happy to be hearing. I also, aside from reading Moby Dick, another thing that I did over this crazy time is I forced myself to really listen to Joni Mitchell, because I just never really been on the Joni Mitchell train, and I finally I did that, and it was good. It was great, and so then there's things that I
like it. Did you wind up liking her?
I ended up completely blown away by, particularly by Blue, which is like the one that is like maybe easier to like for people who don't love Joni Mitchell.
I've come back to Beverly Glenn Copeland. I don't know if you know that work. It's incredible. And I always think of Q-Tip when I think of Joni Mitchell, because Tip is the one who introduced Joni Mitchell to the world of hip hop.
Wow. I'm going to Google that after this.
I did a lot of research and looked at several of your pieces of your films. And I came up with I index carded like Sally Jesse Raphael. But I wanted to read the index card topics that I wanted to touch on with you.
Okay.
And this is looking through your work, but it's really referencing. I bring it back to Vic, to Patty, I'm going to throw Joni Mitchell in there. I'm not again, I was never on that train, but I'm going to guess that through what I presume is immense instinct on her part, that she arrives at a lot of the choices that she makes as a recording artist or as an artist through mistake. And I wanted to talk about that. That's my number one. But we're going to start with that. God is in the mistake. So what is a mistake, and how does that push you out of your own head and into a larger part of an instinctual, unconscious path of discovery when making things, when making films, when making music, when writing lyrics, when writing prose. I would throw many of the people that we truly, truly admire into that list. So there's God is in the mistake. There's music and film and how they come together, and how a visual and sound work together. And that's something that you work with a huge amount. Beauty in the extraordinary, the elevation of the ordinary. And that's something that, again, as a filmmaker, you've worked with a lot. Dissonance and juxtaposition. And I think a lot about your visual eye and how you marry that with often dissonant music or musical passages, and the people that you've chosen to work with. And then the other things we've covered, although there's one last one, and it does actually really apply, the sentimentality and its place.
I think that there's nothing bigger than chance in my work, and I don't do all of my work as a street photographer by any means, and I'm not one of the great street photographers. I mean, when I watch my friend Michael Ackerman on the street, I realize he's a street photographer. I'm not a street photographer, because he's fearless in a way that I'm not, and I'm reticent in a way that he isn't. And but I will say that the thing about street photography, or about documentary, that matters so much to me in a way, is that you can't control it. Like you're standing somewhere and things are bouncing at you like particle physics, and you don't know what they're going to be. You don't know what's coming around the corner. So you have to accept that. And as people who are kind of control freaks, that's a weird thing to embrace. but it's wonderful, and it also, like, it has to do with that book I just described about the birds. It has to do with improvised music. It has to do with a lot of bands I loved. I mean, Fugazi never had a set list. They never played with a set list. Every single night, every single song could go to any other song, but they weren't improv musicians in the way that some other improv musicians dedicate their lives to that, but they built it in to their way of working that was completely integral, and so that kind of thing is crucial to me, to accept chance, to accept and embrace some things that you're not going to be able to control, and to celebrate that. I don't edit like a normal person because I never learned to, and it never really interested me, because I always thought like editing is like thinking. It is free association in pictures and sounds. So if you want to emphasize the free part, well, that has nothing to do with what most traditional movie making thinks about editing as. They think about rules and how you will tell a story by getting from here to here through the editing. And I, for whatever reason, never picked that up or threw it away. I'm interested in this notion of how it can be free like thought. And so there are things that I will never know until I try them. And if I put this sound next to that picture, I can think all I want that it'll work or that it won't work, but I don't know. And then I do it, and then it can completely take me by surprise. And that's just one of the great pleasures, is to have your presuppositions hijacked and have something work in some strange way. As far as, I have to be careful talking about music and image, because I have to avoid a tirade that I've given too many times, which is my tirade about music video. I can sum it up by saying that my trouble with music video is in part that I think it became a form of advertising, and I don't think that the primary or dominant way in which images and music are conjoined in our lifetimes should be advertising. Like, I consider that to be unacceptable. And so I had a lot of problems with the industry. But the other problem I had was with a kind of one-to-one correspondence with image and sound that I realized was actually not at all difficult to do. Like, it's very easy to cut on the beat, and it's very easy to make images work with music in a really easy way. And that for 25, 30 years now, I've been tormenting myself with that challenge of trying to have images and sound work in ways that are somehow mysterious, or somehow freeing, or somehow not what you would expect. And I for the most part, I got out of music video with a few exceptions, but I did one recently for a wonderful musician, Jessica Moss. I don't know if you watched that one. She's a solo violin person, and she's doing wonderful work. And she was in that band Silver Mount Zion, but now she's doing this great solo work. And
I have a funny story to tell you about that, and I'll be brief. I watched it. I thought you sent me a list of things, and some of them I'd seen before, and others I had not. I watched it, and then the one that you had on your list in Vimeo directly after that was Patti Smith reciting about passages, right?
Oh yeah. I forgot I gave it.
So I opened a new window. I went to Vimeo, and I was like, wow, Jim made this really wild. I mean, he's taking this like mistake and music thing so far that he has Patti Smith reciting this dialogue, this beautiful dialogue in her voice over this incredible imagery of this incredible building. I'm like, am I in Rome? Am I in Paris? It turns out I'm in Paris, but I thought I was in Rome. But her voice is mixed so low because you have this crazy music playing behind it.
Now I know it's coming.
This super crazy music. I'm like, what the fuck is this music? It's so insane. And Jim had the audacity to include Patti, but then have this music like drowning her out through half of it. And the film ends visually, and Patti ends, and the music keeps going for 12 minutes. I'm like, what is he doing? And then I realized, of course, that the Vimeo that I had seen of Jessica, is that her name, the cellist?
Jessica Moss. Yeah.
Jessica,
Violinist.
Sorry. Yeah. Vimeo had gone on to the next. They had me on a loop, and I was listening to, and I can tell you what it was. In fact, it was very Jem Cohen, but it did not. I mean, it actually worked with passages, but I took a screenshot when I realized my mistake, and I thought you would really. This is a very Walker Percy kind of moment for both of us, I think. Manuel Minnock.
Okay.
Baby, it has to fall.
Yeah. So this is a great piece, and Ephraim is one of my dear friends. Ephraim is the person, one of the founders of Godspeed You Black Emperor, and he's doing great work right now in a duo. He's doing great work in a duo with Kevin Doria called Sing Sync Sync. I always get the name wrong. Ephraim's a great musician, and we go back a long way. So that would work with that piece. It's actually, the piece of mine is a film that very few people have seen called The Passage Clock, which is really a tribute to Walter Benjamin,
Walter,
and to Chris Marker, and to Patty, and it's a weird.
There's your still from it.
Yeah, that's a church in Paris, and I shot it with the Bolex in 16 millimeter. And then I was trying to make this in time to have it be shown in like a ridiculous window of like 2 weeks. So the only people who could turn the footage around was a local lab that was artist run called L'Abominable, like. I don't speak French, but it was like the abominable. And so I took it there, and the footage came out looking like it had been buried in dirt for 150 years, which was perfect for the piece. Yeah. And so, that was I was very pleased.
Was that for Patty's show?
It was for Patty's show. I was very honored to be able to collaborate with her on some pieces for this big show that they were doing of her work in Paris, and that was one of the films that was done in 3 weeks time to be in it. So chance, mistake, they are all, and what Patty is doing in that piece is she is reading all of the definitions of the word passage from the Oxford English Dictionary, which go on for, probably 10 or 12 pages. And then I did like a cut up, as per William Burroughs, of her reading those definitions. And I moved them around in my edit so that they made sense to me with the images. And then I wrote some text of my own. So it's totally about that. It's about all of those things. It's about the ephemeral, and about chance, and about mistakes, which are mistakes that aren't mistakes.
It's a beautiful show. It's a beautiful piece, by the way. I went back and watched it without the music.
And I will tell Ephraim that it's a nice story, and I love his music, so it's okay. But anyway, another memory that I will bring you in on is when I was cutting the video for Country Feedback, that was one of the first places where I was deeply embedded. I don't know. It was a battle because I really liked the song, and I didn't even think really that it should have images with it. And I had to do them, and I kept paring them away. I put a bunch of things in. I shot a bunch of stuff. It kind of worked, and then it pissed me off because it worked fine. It worked well, and I kept pulling images away. And I just remember feeling the weirdest feeling. I would step out of the edit room, and I felt like physically almost ill with wanting to just pare it down more and more, and thinking that sometimes it would really be best to listen to something and while looking at something very minimal, so that the image and the sound would meet and not beat each other up, because one of them usually beats the other one up.
And
I wanted,
I'm in complete accord with that. That exactly the way. And at the same time, I was a pop star and a pop artist, and
you had to navigate in waters where those were not always viable rules. Let's just say
I made some terrible, regretful choices.
There are anyways.
Our work together in that is not among those.
Well,
I learned a lot from you. That's all. The point being.
But the weird thing is that I'm still in this fight and I can't seem to solve it. So I formed this weird thing called Gravity Hill Sound and Image, in which I do these live shows with projected images, and then I ask musicians that I love to work with them. And sometimes we hash it out together and something is composed and it has to be very tight. Sometimes there are cues. Like we did that show about Cape Breton called We Have an Anchor that I think you saw. And
the BAM, right?
Yeah. And they had to get in and out for like documentary material for dialogue. So it had to be very tight. It's not an improvised show. But there are other shows we do where I, will cut them loose, and I will create images sometimes which are very I don't know. I just it's fascinating to me, and I can never feel like I quite get it right, but I keep trying. And there are a lot of circumstances in which, frankly, I don't want to work with music and image. I barely put music in my films these days for the most part. And then, of course, when I make a rule like that, I try to kick my own ass a little bit and see if there's a way in which I need to break my rule. So, I don't want to, it's not like I'm not going to put music in my film soundtracks. But I often tend to like movies more where they don't do it, where they resist the temptation. But I do these live shows where I get to tangle with it in a different way, because it's just going to happen one night. And, and so I'm not.
Do you always record those? Just wondering.
No, they're rarely recorded. It breaks my heart, frankly, because some of them are like, we're in Istanbul or Porto or New Jersey for one night, and it's never going to happen again, or it's never going to happen that way. But, that's kind of like the life of a lot of musicians who play live, and you have to sort of accept that. But every once in a while, it does get documented. I do have to say, I'm going to get off the phone. There are two things that I am cursed with. And one of them, I don't do that many interviews, but, I know this thing, like, it's like interview remorse, or like the ghost on the staircase. There's a great French word for it. Spirit on the staircase. As you're leaving the room or the building, you encounter the thing that you wish you had done,
So let's go to the ghost on the stairs.
Well, those things are that we are in COVID and we are in a political crisis. And I'm glad that we didn't soak in it for the last hour and a half, because we're soaking in it all the time and everybody's soaking in it, and it can be dark, but we have to be reminded that I can't ignore that we are in that as we talk. And what I remind myself of whenever I'm in the middle of that is that a lot of people are in a time of crisis all the time, every day, and they don't need COVID to tell them that, because they don't know where the money's going to come from for the next meal, or they work 3 shitty jobs, or they don't have health insurance. And so, there are a lot of ways that we're going to, as a culture, going to have to grapple with that. But as a week ago, last time I was on Zoom, I was doing a little bit of phone banking for Indivisible. I talked to a guy in Georgia. I got a right winger on the phone, and we went at it for 20 minutes or half an hour. I wish it was productive. I don't know that it was. What I couldn't understand is that, he was arguing from a libertarian point of view, saying that the worst thing for him was big government and people going to come in to take away his guns. But I said to him, hey man, do you have health insurance? And he said, no. He said, no, he had no health insurance. We're in a pandemic. And he's telling me that his biggest fear is big government. And I said, man, Vic Chestnut had pre-existing conditions and was haunted by medical debt. We need health insurance in this country. We're going to have to work on that together as a country. And so that's one of the things that people are trying to do as they work on all these other crises and problems. And we had this terrible incident with Congress and this kind of infiltration, riot, takeover, but everybody's got to keep their eyes on the takeover that is not just about what happened on January 6th. They've got to think about the corporate takeover that makes too many decisions based on money and not based on the people's sustainability. And so I leave the politics at that, but just to say that, that's what I'm reminded of in these times, is to remember that the crisis doesn't end when the vaccines come and a lot of us feel like we're in the safety zone now. No. So, the whole other topic that we could have gotten into, which I just don't have answers. I just don't have solutions that I wish I had, has to do with LaunchLeft. It has to do with how people are coming together as musicians, as activists, and so on. But there's this underlying pressing dilemma, which is how we can use things like the internet and let people know about good stuff, but also how are we going to making stuff sustainable? How do artists keep going? Like, I don't know. It seems terribly clear to me that Spotify is not a solution. It has become part of the problem. I don't have a social media presence, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a really bad thing, because a lot of the things that we talked about in this hour are things that nobody has ever heard of, because I'm not on Facebook. So they couldn't read about it on Facebook, which is where people read about stuff. And so it's not necessarily like, I'm not necessarily thrilled or proud that I'm not on social media. I mean, I'm not happy that, I'm single and people meet each other on the internet, apparently. Like, there's a lot of things that I just haven't solved,
I love how much Patty Smith has taken the platform of Instagram and completely corrupted it, and not corrupted, but she's made it her own thing. She doesn't know the rules of this particular platform, and so she's used it as this kind of beautiful sharing and teaching device.
Patty's really made it work, and I go to her Instagram, and I
But short of that,
Cat Power, I go to her Instagram because she's fired up, and I love to see there. It taps me into strains of activism that I often miss. There's a lot of that, but I still. So like a couple of weeks ago, I almost got convinced to do an Instagram, and I realized, like, I've got a million pictures that I would love for people to see. And I started, old postcards. I mean, not just my own stuff, but just I collect old photos. I've got a bunch of weird stuff. And then I went and read the Instagram terms. And it's like, they say, we do not own what you post on Instagram. And then in the small print, they say, but we can do whatever we want with it. And we can give it to a third party to do whatever we want with it. That's really disturbing. I don't know now whether I feel okay about going ahead and doing that account. I'm conflicted. So these, to me, are issues that we need as artists to somehow get our, that we need to work on. I know that Mark Ribot works on them with the organizing that he does of musicians getting fair pay and fair due, and there are people who are specifically concentrated on it, but I still want us all to be aware. I mean, I know that you had an Instagram and a Twitter, I think, and well, you never had a Twitter, but you had an Instagram and you bailed on it, and that's that was an interesting moment to me.
Twice. I left it, and I came back, and I did something really absurd with it, where I would photograph myself with other very famous and very renowned people who had done incredible things, and I would cut them out of the image. So all you saw was my face beaming, and then you'd get half of Salman Rushdie, or half of Tilda Swinton, or half of whoever it was, Patti Smith.
Oh, I do not. I don't know what to make of that. But anyway, suffice to say,
But I read the book, the Jaron Lanier book, and I already knew that I wanted to leave social media because there's an addictive element to it that is not good for me. I'm not an addictive person, but I'm a person of a certain age, and I found myself on Instagram way too much, and it just was eating up.
Let me just identify that book, because I think it's a very important book called, I believe it's I Am Not a Gadget.
No, it's 10 Reasons to Leave Your Social.
Okay, those are both Jaron Lanier. The earlier one, I think, was called You Are Not a Gadget, or something along those lines. But look him up, and the 10 Reasons. There's some very important thinking there. But there's also it's a joy to see Patty's Instagram, and I'm thankful for it. But I'll also be completely happy for her if she decides at some point that she's done. She has to.
Yeah, I agree. And a better platform is going to come sooner. The sooner, the better. A better platform that doesn't claim in the small print that they can do with your content whatever they wish.
Well, I look forward to that.
Jaron Lanier aside, and I recommend also everyone go and check out his books and his ideas about social media and about these platforms that you and I both do not participate in. There is a new thing that you're doing at Vimeo, and I, in looking up stuff to have this conversation today, can you talk about that? Because you put some of your shorter pieces up for rent on Vimeo.
Yeah, and even some of the longer ones. Yeah, I finally, during this whole lockdown period, I felt bad that there were a lot of things that I've made that nobody had any way to access, really. I mean, if you're a university or a little museum or a film festival, then you could probably access them. But for people, it was really hard to do or impossible. So I did start to use Vimeo on demand, and there's a page there that people can go to, and I will continue to put work up.
I want to end finally with a bit of advice. Let's have conversations in terms of your archive, in terms of all of your work and where it's going to go, what's going to wind up with it. Go meet with someone at the New York Public Library.
Easier said than done, but libraries, they do wonderful work. What I'm really thrilled about is if people are in Washington, D.C., they can go to the archive of Jem Cohen, no relation, but a great filmmaker, an incredible photographer, wonderful musician, great banjo player. He left us a year or so ago, and his stuff is in the Library of Congress being preserved right now in the most wonderful way. So this is something also that people can access and look forward to. And thanks to them for doing that. Right on.
The last time I went to the New York Public Library, I went through the archive, the personal archive of Virginia Woolf. It was incredible.
Wow. That's amazing.
That might be where the personal archive of Jem Cohen belongs in all your work. I just saying.
Kind of you. Maybe we'll end with, that is a one-time, one show only event, which was a show called Evenings Civil Twilight in Empires of Tin that I did with Vic and Guy Picciotto and Todd Griffin and Catherine McRae and a bunch of other people, Jessica Moss. It was a big band. Ephraim, a bunch of wonderful, solid musicians took it on, but it was terrifying. It was a big show, complicated as hell. It was a reflection on empire that was a contrast between the Bush Empire and the Habsburg Empire, because we were doing the show in Vienna. So it had to do with a writer that I love, Joseph Roth, and a book called The Radetzky March that I recommend. And we did this crazy show, but it was really built around Vic and Vic's, some of his existing music that fit in bizarrely enough to critique of Empire. And we did it, but it was by the seat of our pants. And it was one of those things where a long line of people had to be held at the door while we desperately tried to get our shit together with like sound problems in the room. And then it happened for an hour and a half, and it will never happen again. It's impossible. But luckily it was documented. It's a little primitive because it was shot in DV, but I actually think they did a good job. And I edited it into a long form called Empires of Tin that this great label in Montreal has available on DVD. So
that German guy with the wonderful voice reciting.
Yes, with Bobby, who ended up that's when I first worked with Bobby, who ended up being in Museum Hours. So that's the same guy. That's the same guy. That's the same guy. That's how I met him. I listened to him. He was a driver, a non-actor, sometimes working as a waiter, and he had a great voice. And we put him in. We asked him if he would read these texts, and he did such a beautiful job reading them that I thought, wow.
I'm so moved.
This guy.
I know how much I love Museum Hours. I'm so moved.
Anyway, yeah. So again, chance. Waiter, driver, non-actor, beautiful voice. Put him in this, and then ask him if he can do that, and he was great in it. I
think that's a perfect way to end.
Anyway,
man, I love you so much. Welcome to 2021. We are moving towards the light. We are moving away from the ashtray darkness, the shadow self of 2020. COVID is still with us. People are hurting everywhere, but I do believe that there's a brighter day ahead. I think
I second that. I don't know if I can raise it, but I'll try a little bit.
From my heart to yours.
Okay. Peace.
Those rustic city fathers were realtors. And all that profit taking was a beautiful awakening. They built themselves a beauty by the ton. Ton by ton. I went there in a panic, or for fun, or for fun. I thought I had a calling, and anyway, I just kept dialing, and I sat beside the big puddle like a Shriner. An angry Shriner. I went to view the tower, its majesty, on a dead-end street. It was a very long journey, and it took a lot of energy, but I strode across the flat battlefield in the sun. The filthy sun.
LaunchLeft aims to create an intentional space that highlights and empowers all artists for whom radical creativity is not a choice, but a necessity. LaunchLeft begins with music, but its ultimate aim is to launch left-of-center artists in all creative fields.